This will be from the beginning, so entering, basic info, setting up the account, making sure you're able to use it to the fullest ability. Let's get cracking. So what we're going to have a look at today is, as I briefly touched on, setting up your account. So this will be things like business details, adding your company logo, setting up your bank account. We'll talk about open banking as well, creating suppliers and expenses. We'll also talk to you about quick wins, so how to use some of the other features like our Snap Expense app, and setting up more advanced things like recurring expenses, which can be really, really handy and a massive time saver. We'll also talk to you about setting up clients and how to absolutely smash your invoices every time, making sure it's got the correct info on it. And we'll probably talk to you as well about recurring invoices as well. And then if we've got time, we'll talk to you about bank reconciliation. We won't go into too much detail because it's its own beast in reality, but we'll give you some idea of what it is and why it's so important. And then finally, we'll talk to you about the help center and some of our additional services as well. So I think that's more or less it. Katie, did you want to add anything at all?
I think you've covered it all there. It's time to get started.
When you do log into your Crunch free account, you're going to be greeted by this page. Okay, now I'm aware that most of you have logged in already, so you might have already got to this stage. Perhaps you've actually done some of these steps as shown here, but if you haven't, I'll give you a quick walkthrough again just to make sure you haven't missed anything. Now, this is your home dashboard, and while you could perhaps see some of these as your starting blocks, if you will, you could add a bank account, you could upload your logo. My recommendation would actually be to go to your settings first, and do some of this early. So if you go to the top right, you'll see probably your business name up here as well. Press this button and then press settings. What you then want to do, firstly, make sure that your business name is correct. If it's not, you can make changes to it from here you can do any of the changes using these pencil icons. Registered office address, if you've got one. So this is basically where on Companies House, this is what's shown on Companies House. So if you look up the public register, you need to make sure that this address is what's shown on the public register. And then lastly, your business address. Now make sure the business address is accurate, because ultimately that's what's going to show on your invoices. So these are legally binding documents. You want to make sure that the info on there is correct. And then also, if you are VAT registered, make sure that you've got the correct VAT registration number here as well. The business logo, it's entirely up to you. In truth, you can add one and that gets stamped onto the invoice when you send it to your client as well. So if you wanted to do that, just go to this section here and then you can choose a file from here. Now, it's worth noting they have to be quite small in size, so 200K as a JPEG or a PNG file. But once you've uploaded it, you will get the opportunity to preview what it looks like on an invoice as well. So you could make maybe changes to it if you wanted to and you weren't quite happy. I guess the last thing to point out in this settings page, and I'm probably skipping ahead slightly, but it's really important to note, when it comes to completing your company's year-end accounts, whether you upgrade to a Crunch paid for service and we do them for you, or perhaps if you take them to another accountant, maybe you've got your own accountant, entirely up to you, you will need to give them the data that you're entering into this account. So that will be things like expenses, invoices, any money that you've taken out of the business. They need to know about it in order to prepare your accounts properly. So once you do need to do that, go back to settings and then you can export the entire range of your Crunch account as well. So that's just really, really important to note, that that's where it is and that's what you'll need to do. I think that's probably more or less it from me on the settings side of things. Katie, do you want to throw anything in?
Yeah, just marketing preferences are in there as well. So you've got the option to say if you want to opt in or out of any correspondence from us. So we have things like newsletters which come out with updates and new features, things that are going on with Crunch. So if you want to hear about that, go in there, say that you want to hear from us. If you don't, you've also got the option to say that you'd rather not as well. So
Yeah. I think by default, to be fair, I think all of these are set to no. So as you'll see, I didn't do anything with this, so these are all unchecked. But yeah, like Kate said, if you do want to stay in the know and keep up to date with recent developments and you know, any of our sort of services offers, you can just check those boxes and you'll get to hear about it straight away. Cool. So if I go back to the home page now, so now that the settings is out of the way, let's quickly talk about actually arranging your Crunch account to use all of the features and benefits that's on offer. So the first thing that you do want to make sure you've done is add your business bank account info. This is essential. It's almost like the foundation of everything else, because without a bank account set up in your Crunch free account, you're not going to be able to create expenses and you're not going to be able to send or issue invoices. So in order to do that, if you haven't set anything up yet, you'll see this button here. The first field here, the display name, simply put, this is your own reference. Okay, this is how you identify that bank account. So if you've got, you know, 2, 3, 4, 5 different bank accounts, this is just to help you distinguish which accounts are which. So it can be really simple, just like a current account. If you've got a different type of account, like a savings, you could do it like that. Or if you do have a handful of different current accounts, you could do something like this. Okay, so name it however you want, just make sure that you are able to tell different ones apart. The bank itself is the provider. So in this instance, I'll just put HSBC as shown above. Now the opening balance, this is quite a common question, to be fair, and it can be quite tricky to understand. So Katie, do you want to take this one from me?
Sure. So your opening balance is basically the balance at the start of your year. And what it's telling Crunch is how much money was in that bank account at that point. The reason it wants to know that is just so it can work out the following balances after your transaction. So if you've got £100 in your bank account at the end of your last year, and then at the start of your next year you have another £100 go in, Crunch needs to know that £200 is the right balance. So by having that previous balance in there, it allows it to calculate the new one and make sure that all the information that's going into your account is going to be correct. So you get a running balance throughout the year there.
That's
Um,
it.
yeah, if you're starting new, then you're probably going to start with a brand new bank account as well. So your opening balance will start from zero. But if you've traded for, say, a couple of years or so, you'll have previous balances from your last year. So you'll need to just look at your statement from the end of whenever your particular accounting period was and put in the balance to open for the start of the new year.
When you look at this message here, you'll see underneath, it actually specifies when the start date of your first financial year is. What this is basically saying in short is that on the 7th, in my example at least, your date will be different. But in my example, on the 7th of October 2020, I need to tell my Crunch free account what the exact balance was on the very first transaction of that day. So I would have to go all the way back to the 7th of October 2020, probably on my online bank account. And then I'd just look at, right, okay, on the 7th, what was the first transaction on that day? And then I would look at the balance of that first transaction. And that is what I would put in here. Like Katie said, I would just need to make sure that everything tallies up from one transaction, well, from one year to the next. So if I've had a previous accounting period, I need to make sure that this new opening balance and financial tax year marries up with that. So as in Katie's example, I think it was you ended with 100 quid in the previous year. The first transaction then in my new year was 100 quid. My opening balance would then be 200 quid in that case. Is that right? Did I get the example right? I'm pretty sure I
Yeah.
did. Yeah, okay, cool.
I mean, hopefully everyone's got lots more money than that in their bank accounts, but you know, I'm just doing easy maths today.
Well, speak for yourself. It's been a tough year for me.
It has been a tough year for everyone.
It's
No
been tough.
judgment.
So yeah, that's, you know, as simple as we can make it. If you do have any questions, I believe there is a little question panel somewhere on here, so feel free to fire away as we move through. You know, don't wait until the end, ask as we go, and then I'll have like little checkpoints where I quickly just flick my head back and forth to see if any questions have been asked, and I'll answer it when I see it. The next bit as well is, simply put, is it a business bank account? Now, all limited companies have to have a business bank account set up. You can't use your own personal bank account. So this is just a verification to say, yes, it is a business bank account. And secondly, it is a pound sterling account. Unfortunately, Crunch Free doesn't support foreign bank accounts. So just make sure that you are only entering pound sterling accounts. And just as another reminder that it is a business bank account. Okay. Very quickly, there are, of course, scenarios where you may use a personal account for certain things, like maybe the odd expense here and there, and we'll touch on that when we talk about expenses. But do not, I cannot stress this enough, do not put your personal banking information into this Crunch account. Yeah, just make sure it's only your business banking information that you're entering. The next item might sound simple enough, sort code and account number, and it is, okay? It's no more complicated than that. However, there are two very important things that you do need to consider when entering this. The first one, of course, is being that it's correct. And the reason I say that is because this information is going to be attached to your sales invoices. So if the wrong info is there, your client's going to end up paying the wrong account. So just double check this before you go ahead and press save. Secondly, what Crunch Free actually does is when you've entered, I mean, I'm about to eat my own words because I know I'm just making up a sort code and account number, but do put the right ones in, is the Crunch Free system's intuitive in the sense of recognizing whether there's integrations available. Okay, and what I mean by that is where we sort of briefly touched on open banking, this is where that comes into effect. So if you enter a sort code that is recognized by our open banking integration feature, the system's going to know that. And then what happens is when I press save, you'll see a reflection of the card, I guess, if you want to call it that, of the bank account you've created, where we can see current account, that's the display name, there's the sort code account number, and there's the opening balances and so on. But what you will see is this icon here. So my Crunch Free account has recognized that sort code and gone, hang on, there is a banking feed available, an open banking free feed for this account. Do you want to set it up? And I guess I'd always say the same thing. It's free, so why not? Okay, open banking is a really, really handy time-saving feature that can save you hours of time and, better yet, headaches. Because if you don't have open banking, you will end up in a scenario where you have to manually download your statements from your online high street bank. You'll then have to manually import them into the system. And while that doesn't sound like too much trouble, and in truth, it's probably really not, I've seen the state of some of the bank account statements that people download, and you have to get these in a CSV format, and none of them are ever the same. You will have multiple columns that you do not need. You'll have things like memo notes, timestamps, loads of other useless stuff that just isn't important when it comes to bookkeeping. You know, the all important fields, in my opinion at least, are a date field, a reference or a description field, you know, what the transaction was, a payment in column, a payment out column, and a balance. That's it. But CSV statements will come with 20, 30 different columns, and you then have to manually go into those statements and start picking it all apart and deleting the columns that you don't need. Okay. Now, I probably put you off manually importing statements ever again, and that was intentional. So always look at open banking if you can. If there is a scenario where you do have to manually import statements, we haven't left you in the dark, don't worry. I'm going to show you the help center towards the end of this anyway, and there is guides and statement statement reformat guides and things like that to help you get rid of those nasty columns that you don't need and then show you the ones that you do need. But all you've got to do in order to set it up is just use the icon, hover over it, press connect your bank account, and you're away. It will take you through some steps on connecting it and synchronizing it with your online bank. Again, they will all be different. Some of you will go through 2 or 3 steps, some maybe more, but believe me when I say that that's the least painful process compared with having to manually pluck apart CSV and Excel bank statements as well. Katie, did you want to add anything onto open banking at all?
Yeah, a couple of points. So just to make you aware, you need to, once you're set up with it, you'll need to re-authenticate your open banking every 90 days, which is really, really simple to do. You'll be notified when you need to do it as well. It'll just be coming into Crunch and just clicking a couple of buttons to say that you want the feed to carry on. If
I think
you
does that appear in this where this icon is as well? Doesn't
yeah,
it?
you'll get a notice saying that you need to re-authenticate, that is coming to an end, and it will be through this section where you just refresh that and allow it to continue on. If you've been trading for a while and you've got backdated statements, it will be able to pull those in as well. If they're older statements, there's a certain window of time banks are allowed to do that, so they'll come in straight away, but you then may have a gap before your next statement upload. So don't panic if everything doesn't all appear all at once. It can take up to 2 weeks for everything to start feeding through, and after that, it will then be a week by week basis.
Perfect.
So
Perfect.
nice and regular.
Cool. Cool. Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, I mean, I know that some people do panic, and I have to admit, when it didn't work for me, I probably did the same thing as well. But just trust the process; it will pull through. It just sometimes maybe takes a week. I don't know why it takes that long. Maybe it's some sort of verification process because you've got like pending transactions and things of that nature now.
That is exactly it. I know we have had quite a few questions about that, so I thought it was worth covering.
Yeah, it's a good point actually, and in truth, I'd never really thought about it, but now it makes sense. Another thing worth noting as well is if you ever want to add more bank accounts, so let's say you did just start with the one and now you need to add another, because obviously you've got this card here now, all you then need to do, again, banking, accounts and cards, go to the bottom right and use this plus icon here, and then you've got the option to either set up a new bank account or a savings account, and that'll add this card here, so you'll just see another one along the side and then underneath and so on and so on. If it's a credit card though, you have to do it slightly differently and just use this button here. It's a very similar form. In fact, actually, it's even less info than the first one. Same process though. So display name, last 4 digits on the card is just a way of identifying it. So if you end up with 2, 3, 4 different credit cards, it's just a way of distinguishing it a little bit more. And then the same opening balance question and the same verification on the business and pound sterling side of things as well. So super quick, really easy to set those things up. Was there anything in particular in this section you wanted to cover as well, or should we move on?
I think let's move on. I think you'll start to get the hang of these bits once you've got other types of transactions in your accounts. It's probably not worth covering for today.
Okay, cool. I might very quickly, if we've got time, just maybe touch down on withdrawals towards the end, but we'll see how we're doing for time.
Yeah, when we circle back to talk about bank reconciliation, it probably falls more into that kind of area, I would say. So, yeah.
That's a fair play. That's a fair point. Okay, cool. So let's move on then to expenses. So expenses in a nutshell, of course, are things that you pay for, right? They're goods, they're services, they're things that either help you, in terms of food and public transport, or they help your business in terms of things like software licenses, web cloud hosting, if you've got a website and you have a domain and everything. So in order to start creating these expenses, you have to have a supplier set up. Now, in order to do this, just go to expenses and suppliers. And in the bottom right, you'll see that again, this new plus button down here. Select that, and this is it. All you've then got to do is put a supplier name in, right? Now, supplier can be an individual, it can be a business, you can make it unique to the place that you're buying the item from or the service from, or you can probably keep some of them quite generic. Okay, so I'll go ahead and I'll create a unique supplier. And what I mean by this is something like Adobe. So this is somewhere that I'm going to be paying maybe a monthly subscription to for their creative suite service or whatever it's called. All right, so I'm going to put Adobe in there as the supplier name. The next drop down section here is a default expense type. Now it says optional. My recommendation though is to set one. Now it's not going to save you hours, don't get me wrong, but it can help speed things up ever so slightly. Now, default expense type means that when I create a new expense for Adobe, it's going to automatically assign the expense type to what I choose here now. So if I go to software and then I press save, it's as simple as that. So I've now got one supplier for Adobe. If I did the same for, let's say it was Dropbox, and then it was for cloud services, do the same thing. So what I'm now doing is I'm basically creating a list of suppliers that I know I'm going to have expenses for, and that's what I would recommend you do as well. Think about all of the places that you are likely to spend money, whether that is somewhere like a software license or a cloud host, whether it's public transport, whether it's a subscription for something, whether it's food, things like that. Create all of those suppliers first, and then when it comes to creating expenses, they'll already be there waiting for you. So I'll continue on creating a couple of these now. So if I was to do, let's do a generic one. Katie, did you want to explain why I'm now going to create a generic one?
Yeah, so in the course of your working life, you're probably going to go to a lot of different places to buy equipment. So it doesn't necessarily need to be equipment. It could be other things that you need just in your day-to-day life, like stationery or food while you're out and about. So rather than putting in every single cafe that you go to, so you don't have to put in Starbucks, Nero, Costa, or everyone else, you can just use one heading and put all of those in one place. It just allows you to keep things nice and concise. It gives you a shorter list of suppliers, so you're not scrolling through millions of different companies there to try and find what you're after. I mean, you can, of course, do that if you want to, but there's not really any need to. I mean, in terms of the information that needs to be reported, as long as you've got what type of expense it is, you know, bunching those together doesn't cause you any problems.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. So yeah, you can, I mean, I would probably, like Katie's quite rightly said, think about the places that you're going to regularly spend money all the time, no matter where it is. You know, your list of suppliers is going to get very, very long if you start to create individual suppliers for every food venue that you go to. Likewise with public transport, if you start listing all of the train services, TfL, National Rail, Gatwick Express, whatever it is, it's going to get clogged up with suppliers. So those type of expenses, I would actually create generic ones for, like Katie was saying, and for the more niche ones, should we say, like Adobe and Dropbox and you know, even Amazon, I guess, or Apple, if you're buying equipment to a certain extent, create those as individual suppliers. That's fine. So let's go ahead and actually create an expense. So all you need to do is go to expenses, as we can see here. Now, if it's the first expense you haven't created any expenses, you will see this. If you have had a go at creating expenses, you'll see this option as well. Either way, we're now going to move on to creating a brand new expense. So supplier, this is now going to show me all of those suppliers that we just created. So we'll see Adobe, Dropbox, food and public transport. Now, if you get to this point and perhaps you've forgotten to create a supplier, or perhaps one doesn't actually match your list, don't worry, use the new supplier button. You'll be taken back to that form where you can set it up, and then you can jump back to this section and crack on. So I'll go ahead with, let's do public transport then in that case. So I've chosen public transport. I now need to enter the date that I'm paying for it. So the 5th. It's worth noting as well, if you are doing a bit of catching up, then you can backdate your expenses as well. So just bear that in mind, but it won't let you, of course, enter expenses in the future, because if they haven't happened, you can't claim for it. You've got a few options underneath here. So you'll see add a note. You will see attach file, but I accidentally clicked on it just before the date, but that will be there. So you've got attach file, add a note, make this chargeable to a client, and add a reference. Now, attach a file does what it says on the tin. If you've got a photo of your receipt or anything like that, or you've got any supporting documents, you can upload those alongside the receipt as well. It's worth noting that on the export of data that I touched on at the beginning, these also do come with it as well. So if you were doing something like storing all your receipts in a shoebox beforehand, don't worry, you can probably get rid of that shoebox now, because as long as you're uploading all the receipts digitally, that's the modern age we're in, digital copies are absolutely fine. And then when it does come to producing your year-end accounts and you export the data, if you need to, those will all come with it. All right, so you can hand over the evidence as well. You can also add a note here. Now, all of these, in fact, are optional, but this one in particular, I would always strongly recommend attaching a file and uploading a digital copy of that receipt. A note, the note box here can be used to help maybe separate journeys. So with this one, because we set it up as a generic supplier, that's absolutely fine. If we wanted to differentiate perhaps which train line we used, we could put a note in like this here. Okay, it's entirely up to you. It could be as simple as that, or it could go on and on. It's up to you. Hand in hand with that, actually, just while we're on this, is adding a reference. Now, this is almost very similar, if not the same, as a note. But this reference here, you could perhaps use for something like specifying the journey, for instance. So the note would be, I traveled with TfL. My reference would be London in that case. And then once you've created that expense, this will show alongside that expense, which I'll show you in just a moment. Okay. Making it chargeable to a client. Now, I'm not going to bore you to death with this, but I'll try and give you a short and sweet explainer. Unless, Katie, did you want to have a crack at explaining rechargeable?
Sure, yeah. I mean, if you are working on a job, perhaps you've been asked to do some additional traveling as part of it. If you're lucky, hopefully your client will offer to reimburse you for some of that travel. So what you can do is you'll have to pay the expense, the initial outlay, hold on to your receipts, and then you can attach them here when you're setting up your expense, mark it as rechargeable, and that will allow you to then add that expense to an invoice to send back to your client. And then when they pay your invoice, they'll also reimburse you for that expense as well at the same time.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Yeah, so that's actually really handy. So yeah, I've attached it here to this one. So when we get to the sales invoices section and we go through that together, I'll show you what this actually does, and then you can see it in action as well. So moving on to the items section, this is simply what is the expense? What is it that you're spending the money on? So description itself could be as simple as a train ticket, something like that. Now you'll notice that I don't have to change this. It's already set public transport, right? And the reason is because, as I mentioned earlier, with the default expense type drop down for the supplier, that's what this does. So if I now change this to Adobe, you'll see it's changed to software for me. And the other thing as well that's worth pointing out hand in hand with this is, I mean, you can still change it, don't get me wrong. You know, if perhaps it was Adobe, but now it wasn't a bit of software and it was a subscription, you can still change this. It's not locked in just because you've set a default type. But hand in hand with this is the VAT rate. You'll see that this is also a drop-down menu which you can change as and how you please. But I want you to keep an eye on this bit now, because if I change this to public transport, you'll see the VAT element has automatically assigned itself to 0. The reason it does this is because Crunch3 quite intuitively knows which expense types, so which of these have VAT applied to them. So even if I was to change this now, so if I keep it as public transport, but I change this to vehicle rental, it now changes to standard for me. The option is there if you do need to change it, but 9 times out of 10, you're not going to need to touch this at all. You can just let the system work out, right, this expense type doesn't have VAT, this expense type does have VAT. So that saves you a bit of a job there as well. Some expense types, like food, for instance, so if I select this, you'll see that I have to determine, or I have to specify what the VAT rate is. The system's not going to determine that for me. The reason that is at the moment currently is because HMRC have introduced a temporary reduced rate of 5% with the whole pandemic going on. So in this scenario, you now need to say whether it's still got the standard VAT rate applied to it, or if it does have the reduced rate. It's always worth checking on your receipt for these types of expenses, because it will actually tell you whether it's a standard or a reduced VAT rate. So for food in particular, do double check your receipts first before going ahead and just leaving it perhaps as a standard, because it might be reduced, or vice versa. So I'll crack on then. So I'll go back to public transport. Again, we'll see that that's now changed for me. I'm going to go to the amount, and this is just the total that you're paying for it. I'm going to completely make up a cost now. I'm going to put 1510. Sounds about right. It's probably not. It's probably about £100 more expensive than that, but we'll go with it. And then the payments section as well. So this is just simply how you're paying for the expense. Now, you'll see that these two dates match, okay? And most of the time, it's going to stay like that, okay? Now, the option is here to change this, just in case there is perhaps a delay to your payment. So let's say that I initially bought it on the 3rd. But actually, when I looked at my bank account, the money didn't come out until the 5th. So I can keep my account records accurate by saying, okay, initially, this is when the transaction took place, but actually the reality is this is when the money came out of my account, okay? Then you just need to determine the payment method. Now, I briefly touched on earlier about the differences between having a business bank account and your own personal bank account. Now, I also said that there may be every now and then that you forgot your business bank account card and you had no option but to use your own personal card. I mean, the chances are that probably would be for something like food or the odd ticket for a train or a bus or whatever it is. You do have the option to mark something as being paid by you personally. Okay, so you've got a few different options here. These are all business related, so transfer out the business bank account. Of course, if you've got more than one account, you can then determine which account using this drop down. If you have, though, used your own personal bank account, use this option instead. Okay, so this again just helps you reflect correctly what you're paying for, and B, how you're paying for it as well. That's probably it in terms of the expenses. Have I missed anything on this one?
No, I think we've got everything covered there.
Everything good to go? Okay, cool. Oh,
Yeah.
and one last thing as well. If you are perhaps backdating, so say you're doing a bit of catch up on maybe public transport or maybe even food in that respect, just go to save and add similar, and it will just keep bringing you back to the expenses page so that you can almost rinse and repeat the expenses until you're done. But if you're happy with it though, just go ahead and press save. Okay. Now, this will take you back to the expenses dashboard where you'll see you've got a note that the public transport supplier, you've got a note of the note that you added earlier, you've got the reference of London in there, and you've got that it's actually rechargeable to a client as well, alongside things like the total amount, whether it's paid, and what the date of it was as well. If you ever need to edit or delete any of these, use the pencil icon to edit, the delete button, the bin icon, sorry, to delete. It's probably worth very quickly explaining recurring expenses as well, because that is a huge time saver and can really take away a lot of the administration work. If you've got regular direct debit set up, it's the same date, it's the same amount every month, standing orders, exactly the same thing. I'd probably recommend, in the same way that you set up your suppliers, going through that list and thinking about every single place, I'd probably recommend doing the same for recurring expenses as well. So get all of the sort of monotonous stuff out of the way, the stuff that you know is bound to come up, just automate it in that case. So you can do that by going to expenses again, then going to recurring expenses. So Katie, did you want to take this one away from me and give a quick run through of it?
Sure, certainly. So yeah, if you want to set up a recurring expense, you will have the button here if you haven't done this before, or in the bottom of your screen, you'll also have the little plus button as well. So once you go into here, it's really similar to setting up an expense. You're going to select who your supplier is. So in this one, Adobe, and how frequently you want this to appear in your account. So whether that's once a week, every day, once a year, and you can select what days it goes on as well, how many times a month you want it to happen. So it might be that you actually need it to record twice a month, for example, so you could put that in there. Your starting on date is when you want that first expense to start recording from. So you can set a future date for that, unlike any other type of expenses, because it's not going to record it until it reaches that date. Once it hits that date, it will then put it into your account automatically for you. On the ending section, you can choose when and if you want that to expire at any point. So if you were to select never, it will just keep going and keep going and keep repeating until you manually go in and stop it. The other options you got there is on, so that means that you can select a specific date that you want it to run till. So if you've got a subscription that you know runs out at the end of the year, you can put that in and it will run until then. The other option is after, which is after so many expenses have been recorded. So, for example, if you've got something that you pay for every month and you're on a year's subscription, like a phone or software subscription, you can put that in and then say 12 months, and then after 12 times, it will then stop and it won't record anymore unless you decide to go in and set it up again. Description is just like the expense. It's just so that you've got something there that, you know, it makes it clear to you what it is. And the same with the expense types and the VAT rates. As the expenses are just making sure those are correct. So you do also have the options to add notes and make rechargeable as well. Sorry, I skipped over that before.
That's all right.
So if you do want to add in anything extra there, then you still got those options to do that. You won't have the option of course to add on a file because you haven't incurred it yet. So if you do decide that you want to add something on later, you can go back in and edit your expense in order to upload that later on, or just hold on to it in your own records, whichever's easier for you. And then finally, your payment method, just selecting how it is that you're paying for it. So whether that's coming out your business bank account, if you pay for it personally for any particular reason, and then which bank account you pay it out from if you've got multiple bank accounts. Once you save that, then that's it. That's all set up, and that will just record when you've asked it to, which will help save you a lot of time, hopefully.
If you do go through this and start creating, en masse different recurring expenses, you'll end up with a list here, almost like a scheduler. So this will be almost like a planner in a way. So you'll have a list of the suppliers here that they're set up for. You'll have the amounts that they're set up for. The status is whether it's active or inactive. So in this example, when this hits the 13th month, this will change to inactive. So it will keep the record, but it will no longer be operating. And then you've also got the exact schedule here. So monthly on the 5th, the next occurrence is the 5th. And going back to Katie's suggestion of editing, that's absolutely fine. You can use the pencil icon to do that. You can use the bin icon if you want to completely remove the schedule from records. I think another thing worth pointing out as well, which I'm not sure I touched on earlier, is just going back very, very quickly to the VAT element side of things. You'll notice that while this has got standard selected, all you have to put in is the total amount. So that's just one thing I did sort of skim over slightly. Is for all expenses, put the total amount, not the amount without VAT. You put the full amount in there with it, because what the system will do is separate the elements for you. So it will actually give you the actual item cost or the service cost, whatever it might be, and it will portion off the VAT element separately, so that you know exactly what you're paying for in terms of the item or the service or whatever it is, and then what you're paying VAT, what you're paying for VAT on it as well. Cool. So that probably covers us for recurring expenses. So I think we'll move on to sales now, so to invoicing. Now, in order to get there, just go to sales. And the first thing that you want to do, very similarly to suppliers, is set up your clients first. Okay, so if you have got a list of clients that you work with, if you're an existing business and you've already got a list of clients, set these up first. Okay, so go to clients. And then what you'll be able to do is start entering the details of them, and you can start building a list. And then when it comes to invoicing, you can just pick from that list, like you did with creating expenses, for example. So what you want to do is go to new client in the top right. And in a way, it's a very similar form, albeit a lot longer, to the suppliers form. You need to enter who is the individual or the company that you're working for. So you put that in here. You can also specify default invoice currency. Now this works in exactly the same way as the default expense type. By assigning this, whenever I then raise an invoice for this client, it's going to automatically raise the invoice in the currency that I choose. So I'll leave that here. I'll give you a quick overview of what currencies you can have. So there we go. And then the payment terms. Now, payment terms, be as kind as you like or don't. It's entirely up to you. This essentially is just how long you're giving your client to pay you for that service. So, I mean, by default, it will stay at 28 days. You know, if you want to change it and be 2 days and you want your money as quick as possible, fine. They're your payment terms. You define them and you set them. Now, I've skipped over these three, and I will, because in truth, they're not really important. This is more about the business itself, you know, their business. So what's their telephone number? What's their email address? What's their website? You don't need to put that in. You can if you want, but it's not going to prevent you from moving on if you don't. The important section, though, is the contact details. Now, this is super important because this is how you're, or who you're going to send the invoice to through your Crunchfree account. So make sure that you've got the exact contact name in here. I'm going to be really creative and use John Smith, and then the email address as well. Telephone number and role, I'm going to leave blank. Again, they're not essential. Put them in if you want, but you don't have to. Just make sure that you do tick this box next to the person that you'd like to include when you send the invoice as well. Now, if, for instance, you were working for the same organization, but you're now working for a different department, so you'd still be working with BBC in my example, but you'll no longer be working with John Smith, and instead you're going to work with Jane Smith. And this time you just add that contact here instead. Now, by doing this, this means that I can keep my account nice and tidy because it's the same organization. So in the same way that, you know, like generic suppliers for expenses, I'm not going to list every single place that I spend money on food. The list would be horrendous and it would take me ages. So instead, if you've got an organization that you're working for, but just a different department, keep the same client, but just add a new contact. And you can really add as many as you want to as well. But every time you do this, just make sure you check the box to include an email and also change the primary contact, because now when I create a new invoice, it's going to send it to Jane instead of John. Okay. If you want to delete any contacts as well, you can do that via the red X button here. Okay. Now, the billing address is super, super important, and this is exactly the same as making sure that your business address is correct when you set up your Crunch account, because like I say, an invoice is a legally binding document. If one of the addresses is wrong, you might find that you have to have an awkward conversation with somebody about it. So just make sure, firstly, that your business address is correct. Secondly, that when you set up the clients, you're entering their correct billing or trading address. So you just simply pop that in here. Of course, you can specify the country as well that the client's in if it is an overseas client. Don't forget to pick that from the list. I think it automatically sets itself to the UK, but you can change that anyway. Sales invoice note, simply put, is whether you want to put something like a thank you message or information about your website or something like that. Use it or don't use it, it's entirely up to you. It's just an optional field if you want to. And lastly, bank details. So this will automatically check, box will be checked for you. And then all you've got to do is say which bank account you want to be paid into. And then you'll see here that it includes the banking details. So please make payment using the following account details, and it will put those on the invoice for you when you raise it. The last section, a late payment reminder. Now, this may sound really simple, but it's a really, really powerful tool, to be fair, and it can save you having some painful conversations, shall I say, about invoices that haven't been paid yet. Now, this is an automated payment reminder system. So if you check this box, you can then determine, right, 2 days, after my payment terms haven't been met, you put that here. And then continually for 2 days after that point, I want my Crunch Free account to automatically churn out reminders. And I could either specify that I just want to nudge myself, you know, keep reminding myself that I need to speak to this client, or I can do it for myself and the client. So I will get the reminder and they will also get the reminder. Now, for those of you that have a relatively good relationship with your clients, I'd probably recommend only using this one. So just give yourself a polite little nudge, and then you can personalize your communications to them, whether you want to phone them or email them. It's up to you. You know, I'm aware that some things are just an oversight and it just needs a short and sweet reminder, nothing more. If, however, you don't want to bother with any of that and actually you would rather just sort of let the system do its work, press you and the client contact. Okay, cool. Right, so I'm going to go ahead and press save. So now that I've done that, I've got a confirmation message at the top to say that it's been created. And if I now go back to my client list, you'll see this shown here now as well. And like I say, make sure that you do this for as many as you can think of as well. You know, if you are backdating in particular and you've got a batch of invoices that you need to do, you might as well just list all of the clients first to help speed things up when you go to backdate your invoices for bookkeeping. You know, likewise, if perhaps you've got work in the pipeline, you know that you're going to be invoicing a particular client in the future or clients in the future, just go ahead and start listing the clients that you've got potentially to work for. So let's crack on then and actually raise a new invoice. So if I go to sales and invoices, you'll see this section here. Now these are just basically filters. You know, if you end up, once you start building your own account, you're going to end up with a list as long as your arm. So you probably do want to have the option to specify, right, what invoices are either outstanding or have been paid by the BBC, likewise with all of your other clients, and this will just filter out everything else. So if we go ahead and press new invoice, like before, you've got to specify who the client is that you're invoicing. You'll see that their details populate here. Pound sterling's automatically specified because of the way I set this client up. I then need to tell the system what date I want to issue it on. The payment terms are already there. Now I'm going to skim over these two, by the way. The client reference is more for if you've got maybe an old timesheet system and you want to marry up invoice numbers, you can do that just by popping that in here, for instance, something like that. It's up to you, but you don't need to. Payment terms are already defined there. And then you've got invoice line items here. So this is just where you start to now add the information about your service. So description would be, you know, obviously make this a bit more detailed if you're invoicing clients as well, but that's where you'll put that in, put the net amount in here, whether you're charging VAT as well, press save, and you'll see that the system, like it does with expenses, it works out the VAT, does the same with your invoices. So I charged £1,000, but if I'm VAT registered, it's then going to add £200 on for me. Now, if you're not VAT registered, it just won't add the VAT onto the invoice for you. It's as simple as that. So again, you haven't got to work anything out yourself. Once you've done that though, oh, actually, let me quickly show you, because I attached an expense, didn't I, to the invoice earlier. So I'll quickly change that to there. So you'll see here now, I've got this button, add rechargeable expense. So I'm going to select this, and then from this drop down menu here, I can choose the expense that I created earlier. I can put here, it was for my train ticket. I mean, you could even put the job or the service that you performed in order for them to pay you for that there as well. And then you press save. And again, it adds the cost all up for you. All right. So now what this means is that the invoice I'm going to send them includes the amount that they need to reimburse me for that ticket that I paid for. As I
Just
move
to jump
down,
in on that as
yeah,
well before you move down, you may notice there that it's added VAT on top of your expense. That's perfectly normal because when you are adding your expense to an invoice, it makes up part of your services, so it's then a VATable service. So whereas because it was a public train ticket where there wasn't any VAT on the expense, it is still fine that it is adding VAT on top of that. So you don't need to amend that bit there.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And actually, it probably is going to sound a bit strange to some of you as well, but even if you add an expense that had VAT applied to it, it's still going to add more VAT onto it because
Yeah.
it's deemed as part of your service. So it does sound a bit odd, I will admit, and it confused the heck out of me when I first heard about it.
Oh, yeah.
But just be aware that that's perfectly normal, and don't be alarmed if you've got perhaps, I don't know, a bit of equipment that already had VAT applied. You're now attaching it as a
Yeah.
reimbursement and it's adding more VAT onto something that already had that's normal. I know it sounds really weird, and actually saying it out loud makes me feel really weird, but it is normal. All right. So
Just one of those complex VAT rules that they decided just to throw you off a little bit.
yeah. And if you do want to find out more about that, I believe we have got a help center article that is dedicated for rechargeable expenses as
Yeah,
well.
we do
Yeah,
have
so
information.
yeah, and on our Crunch Knowledge website, there's all sorts on there about recharged
Yeah.
expenses. So jump on there if you want to find out a bit more about that. The last couple of items then is just, again, making sure you've included your bank details, make sure this box is checked, choose the correct bank account from here, and then there's the late payment reminders that I mentioned earlier as well. So I'll quickly just pop those back in. Now, at this point, you've got two options. You could save it as a draft or preview an issue. Now, I'm conscious of the time, so I'm going to whiz through this. Saving it as a draft is, as it says, it's a completely changeable and removable invoice. There is nothing legally binding about a draft invoice. So, for instance, if I did this now, you'll see it goes into draft state. Okay, at this stage, it means nothing. Okay, it's just a record of something on my account, which one you could use potentially to create a quote or an estimate. So to do that, save it as a draft, go to its options menu, press create estimate or quote. This then just sends out some info about your service, perhaps as a taster to somebody before they commit to your service and agree to it. If you are happy with it though, what you want to go to instead, quickly jump back on here, is preview and issue. So if you preview and issue this will then give you a summary of what the invoice looks like. And then if you're happy with it and you do want to send it through your Crunch Free account, just use this one here, issue and email. Now you'll see the contact information here. So if we were to have multiple different contacts like we set up earlier with BBC, they would be shown here and you can check the boxes. Here, you've got a basic email subject line. Both of these are placeholders, by the way. Again, they sound quite generic and robotic. Please tailor them to whatever it is that you want to say. Change the subject if you want, change the body content of the email if you want as well. And then if you're happy, just go ahead and press send. That's it. You've now created a client, you've set up an invoice, and you've emailed it directly through your Crunch Free account. So you haven't had to step away from your Crunch Free account at all to get that invoice to them. Now, if and when they do pay you, all you'd need to do, because Katie, did you want to quickly touch on the payment side of things for us?
Sure. So once your money actually comes in, you want to make sure that you're recording it, partly just so that you know what is outstanding in your account. And also if you've previously set up reminders that are going out to your client as well, those are going to continue going until you've marked that payment off. So it's really, really quick and easy to record the payment. So from your menu, you can click record client payments, and that will take you into a new screen where you can simply fill in the details. So you can select the date you've received it and where it was received to. So you can select what account it is. If you've got multiple accounts, you'll be able to specify it there. The amount received is how much you've actually received. So most of the time you'll receive the amount in full. So it defaults to that, but you can edit it if they've part paid for any particular reason. And you'll see it's also allocated at the bottom there, so you can check it's all against the right invoice, and then simply click save client payment, and that will then update your invoice to show that it is paid and that you've created your payment.
Perfect. Lovely.
Simple.
Lovely. So, yeah, so that's pretty much it when it comes to invoicing. I guess the only thing, I'm not going to keep you any longer, to be honest, because I'm aware it's getting on, but one thing worth exploring as well is recurring invoices. They work in exactly the same way as recurring expenses. So if you do perhaps work with the same client you know, perhaps you are on a timesheet or something like that, or you're self-billing and it's always the same cost, set up a recurring invoice for it as well. Like I say, it works in the same way that creating recurring expenses does and can be a big time saver. I think the other thing as well that I will quickly touch down on, I'm not going to go into detail on it though, is just the withdrawal side of things. So withdrawals are every time that you take money out of your business and pay yourself, you must create it as a new withdrawal. Okay, so if you are paying yourself a salary, if you're taking any money back that you're owed, you know, maybe you've put, or maybe you've paid for loads of stuff using your own personal bank account and the business actually owes you money, it's a withdrawal. All right, so that's just one thing to highlight now. And it's really simple. You go to banking, withdrawals, create a new withdrawal, and it's as simple as filling out this form here. When was it? What was the amount? What bank account did you take it out of? Saving it. That's it. Job's done in that respect. So not really much else I can say about that, but it is important to reflect that you're paying yourself in the right way. That's probably it on the software front then. So if we have, oh, actually, very quickly, I do want to show you the help center. I almost forgot. So in the top right-hand side of your account, you'll see this little icon here. I appreciate it's a little bit hidden away, but if you expand it, it says, "Can we help?" You then open this and you get a sidebar down here as well. So you've got complete access to all of our help center articles. You can search for whatever you like in here. You know, let's say that you did want to find out more about bank reconciliation, for example. You know, you've got all that info here as well. Uploading bank statements, how to format CSV files if you unfortunately have to at some point. And you've got other items like, you know, expenses and so on and so on. So use that to your heart's content. There's literally hundreds of help center articles on there that are bound to help you with whatever it is that you need support with. We've also got free business guides for you to explore. We've got free knowledge articles, which are things like keeping up to date with the most recent tax rates, changes to tax law, VAT changes, you know, anything like that. Check it out and you'll always stay in the know there. We've got a collection of walkthrough videos as well. So if you'd rather sort of watch and do at the same time, then feel free to jump on those. That will walk you through absolutely everything in great detail. And then underneath, we've just got a couple of additional bits and pieces for you as well. Finally, it's probably worth shouting about the add-ons. I know Katie mentioned it earlier.
Yeah.
So Katie, did you want to quickly run down on the add-ons?
Sure, yeah. In here, we've just got lots of extra bits to help you get the most out of your business. So if you haven't got a business bank account set up, we've got some business bank account partners in there. You know, we've got insurance if you need some business insurance, debt collection if you know you are really struggling with a client that's not paying your invoices. And we've also got access to our additional add-on apps. So you've got Snap in here, which is for receipt scanning. So download the app, you can take a photo of your receipt while you're on the go, and it will process it, upload it into your Crunch account. So you can have a look at that in there. Similarly, trip capture if you do a lot of driving for work, you know, you can capture your business mileage. Yeah, mortgages, which is a really good one as well, because if you're self-employed, you know, you need someone that's a bit more specialist. But yeah, there's loads of things there. So definitely have a good look around, and you'll almost certainly find something that's of use to you in there.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, there's tons of resources. You know, while it's a completely free to use software, and it always will be, we're never short of giving support where we can. So keep your eyes peeled on that. I'm sure there's something in there that will help you. Like I say, check out the help center, check out our Crunch Knowledge website as well. So if we have a very, very quick, short and sweet recap. So during the session, we had a look at updating your basic business details, so changing your address, registered office, things of that nature. We looked very quickly at uploading a business logo so you can attach it to your invoices. We looked at adding business bank accounts and setting up open banking, creating new suppliers and recording expenses, setting up new clients and sending sales invoices. I don't think we touch down too briefly on reconciling your account, although
We
I'll
ran a
quickly.
bit short of time for that, didn't we?
Yeah,
So,
we're running slightly over at the minute, but as a short and sweet explainer, reconciliation is one of the most important things that you will do. And the reason that we haven't covered it greatly in this session is because it's kind of its own beast, and while it's not complicated, there's a lot to consider when it comes to reconciling your account. So what I would recommend, if you've got time, is go onto that help center, check out one of the help videos in that collection in the sidebar that I showed you about bank reconciliation. It's super important to keep up to date with it. Not only does it ensure that your records are accurate, but it also means that if you do it on a regular basis, you're always prepared and ready for specific filings, you know, things like VAT, things like year-end accounts. You can also use it to help prepare self-assessments and things like that as well. So it's a very, very critical part of the process of maintaining your records. And then lastly, we had a quick tour of the in-app help center as well. So last final mentions then before we dash is some useful resources. Now, this will be sent out to you, this recording. So, you know, if you've got a pen and paper handy, fine, jot what you see down now if you want to, but don't panic, we will get you a copy of this. So you've got the Crunch Free Help Center website at the top, which you can see here. The Crunch Knowledge website, which is where we store all of those, you know, tax rate articles, VAT changes, things like that. That's where you'll find those. And then, of course, you've got our social channels here as well. So I think we could probably end it there. I do want to say thank you all very, very much for keeping with us and for staying. I know that we have run over, but hopefully this has really helped you stay more in the know about Crunch Free, how to use it, how to get the most out of it as well. You know, and if you've got any questions or anything like that, I'll leave this open so that you can pop them in the questions bar here, and then we'll come back to you with answers as well if you have any questions. But that's it from me. So thank you very much for your time today. I'll pass over to Katie for a final sign off.
yeah, just thank you very much. But really hope you found it useful, and hopefully we'll see you again at some more of these in the future.